Hi there. Today I'd like to talk about a new book called Final Verdict by Tobias book, and it's the account of the trial of an SS concentration camp guard which was held in Hamburg. Now, as I started to read the book, there were state elections in Germany, in Thuringia and in Saxony, and the party, the AfD, did very, very well in those two locations, and so they were in the news and there was a lot of coverage. And one of the items was that one of the leaders of the party had been indicted by the German government for using what they considered to be Nazi terminology. And this links very, very well with some of the material in the book, both specifically and also in a wider context. So as well as go over the topics of the book, I'd like to talk about that particular thing as well. So the accused, Bruno Day, had been a guard at Stutthof concentration camp, which was in Poland, and which there was no argument about it. It wasn't mistaken identity as in some other trials and so on. He admitted he had been there. He'd been a guard at the camp. So what the trial did really was focus attention on lots of issues. It brought out aspects of the German legal system and attitudes since World War II, and with obvious parallels to the current situation. And I found that the book really did work on so many levels. Now, one of the things that the book does, it goes into the history of how Nazi war criminals were prosecuted or were not prosecuted following World War II. Broadly speaking, we all know about the Nuremberg trials. Well, there were many, many trials around that time. There were trials of particular concentration camps. There were trials of particular units and so on. But these were conducted by the Allies mainly. They were mainly conducted either by the Allies as a whole, as was Nuremberg, or by, for example, the Polish government or the Estonian government. Obviously, this book concerns the efforts of the German government. Once they received a certain amount of autonomy and they were no longer just a subject people. And one of the things they did was to form a commission. It was called the Zentralstelle, or Central Commission, for investigation of Nazi war crimes. And I first actually read about this in a fictional book, in the Quiller Memorandum in the 60s. He called it the Z Commission, and the book did concern resurgent Nazis. And I didn't realise at that time it was an actual entity, but it was. And it's been very, very active over the years. And the first head of it, Erwin Schuler, had to step down because it was discovered that he had a Nazi past. He had actually been a member of the SA, the Brown Shirts. And this highlights a problem. in German society, that so many of the people occupying positions of power and influence have a shady past themselves. But Thomas Walter became the most energetic prosecutor in the Z Commission, and he did a lot of very positive work. He had a clean record and no ties whatsoever. Now, when I mentioned that the one of the leaders of the German party, the AfD, Alternative für Deutschland, was under indictment for using Nazi terminology, the phrase that he used was Alles für Deutschland, and obviously it's the same initials, AfD, and the phrase Alles für Deutschland, all for Germany, is not the most Nazi phrase you've ever heard. It's not calling for genocide or for restrictions or for invasion or for restricting people's human rights. It's the kind of rhetoric that politicians use all the time, our own included. But he was indicted for it. Now, I'm sure quite a few of you think, well, he shouldn't be using Nazi terminology. But how bad is that when you have a look at the efforts of the German government to actually prosecute real Nazi war criminals? And that's what this book highlights. A couple of examples. SS General Otto Hoffmann. He'd been sentenced by the Allies during their time conducting the war crimes trial to 25 years, but he was pardoned after 6 years. Not because of new evidence or anything like that, it was just inconvenient to have the memories of these people. Then there's the case of Landsberg prison. There was big pressure for many, many years, demonstrations and protests outside it, because it held 89 Nazi war criminals. And by these demonstrations and this pressure, 30 were released and 49 had their sentences reduced. And when I read that, the name Landsberg struck a chord, and of course it was the prison where Hitler had been imprisoned after the Munich Putsch, and he wrote Mein Kampf. So you could say it's almost a Nazi shrine in a way. And for the government to give in to that pressure was remarkable. And another fictional book, The Odessa File, even though I reviewed it, and the term Odessa is a little bit of a silly name, really, because why would you call a secret organization that was protecting the SS? You would have SS in the title. But he did make the very, very strong point, and the very valid point, that so many levels of the German justice system are infiltrated or led by former Nazis, many of whom had similar positions in the Nazi hierarchy. In particular, judges. Many of the judges who were presiding over the war crimes trials had themselves imprisoned people for the Nazis. So, the hands certainly weren't clean. The book gives us interesting insights into the German justice system, which, similar in a way to the French, is judge-led. So the important figure, the person who elicits everything in the courtroom, is the judge. Unlike our system, which is adversarial, and you have the prosecution and defence battling it out, and we have all, the highly dramatic cases. where it's not an effort to find out the truth, but it's an effort to hide the truth on both sides. The prosecution will hide evidence that exonerates the accused if they can get away with it. There are rules of discovery, obviously, and the defence similarly will, advise a no comment interview and give hints as to the construction of alibis and stuff like this. It's not designed to elicit the facts and the truth. Whereas in theory, the German and French systems, because they're led by a judge and the two opposing counsels really don't have that much to do, and they can ask questions of the witnesses, but the judge has already gone over everything he considers relevant. So, you risk upsetting the judge if you try to bring out stuff that you're more or less alleging he's missed. And also there's no jury, so the verdict's in the hands of the judge and the sentence. So it could be a really good system. However, if the judge has a corrupt background and is predisposed to be lenient towards Nazis, for example, then you have a problem. There's no checks and balances really in there. And then another interesting thing from the German legal system is now all laws are made in a laborious process and applied, arguing about what a certain comma means and this kind of thing. But the German definition of murder is particularly tortuous, and it seems pretty alien to us in our system. So much so that there was a Nazi official, Robert Moore, who led one of the Einsatzgruppen, which were the massive killing machines. There were three big ones that were in the conquered eastern territories, who killed political prisoners, local partisans, but most of all killed the Jews. And they did this by shooting. It was called the Holocaust der Kugeln, the Holocaust of bullets. And he ran one of the Einsatzgruppe. The Einsatzgruppe had many sub-commandos, so it was massive thing. And he personally ran it. So, and that's all they did. They didn't do anything else. They had been constituted purely to follow the army, the advancing Wehrmacht, and then conduct these operations. So he had complete knowledge, and in fact he was the guy who gave the orders and set the whole thing up in his particular Einsatzgruppe. So he also took part in the executions to inspire, if that's the right word, his troops. And it was decided by the German definition of murder that he wasn't culpable of murder, which just defies all reason as far as I can see. If that's not murder, then what is? I mean, in some of the concentration camps that were particularly the ones in Germany, a lot of people died through starvation and disease. And the excuse then was, well, it wasn't deliberate murder. But the extermination camps, the Operation Rudolph camps that were set up specifically to kill, the hierarchies there, as well as the people who were the previous killing machine of the Einsatzgruppen, there's no doubt at all that they were guilty of murder. And the paucity of prosecutions, never mind convictions, of people who took, well, for example, in Auschwitz, relatively few of the thousands of SS who were employed there have ever been put on trial. So another big part of the book is concerns the AFD, the political party, and the author he does go on about looking at his own family, his father and grandfather, and what they did during the war, but he does seem to be coming from a particular political point of view. And he sort of makes the point that the AFD is trying to win by democratic means, whereas there are other more violent groups who employ active protests and intimidation and so on. As if it was somehow an underhand thing to do is to employ the democratic method to make your policy points. And I think what it is that the left just cannot understand the position of anybody who is what they term is anti-immigration. And it's more nuanced than that, in my opinion. There are relatively few people who are anti-immigration. In other words, they're totally against immigration of any sorts. Most people would say that we need surgeons, we need other top medical professionals, and we need engineers, people who add to the economy. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. And then the opposite point of view, I don't think there's many people actually who are for totally uncontrolled immigration, where everyone's allowed in. And you get things like the Marielito boat lift, where Castro emptied his prisons and they were all welcomed into the United States under a democratic president. I don't think anyone thinks that's a good idea. Well, there probably are a few people, but they're crazy. So most people have are in some sort of agreement that immigration should be controlled, that you can let certain people in, you can't let everybody in, but it should be up to the country to decide that as a whole. That is controlled immigration. The argument then is how much, and it's a matter of degree. In our country, over the years, there's been immigration. In Liverpool, for example, the Irish immigration has been a major factor, and also the Chinese, the oldest Chinatown in Europe, and they have both helped to make Liverpool what it is. There's no denying that at all. But what's happening now with the uncontrolled and undocumented immigration, illegal immigration, let's use the proper terms, not irregular, it's illegal, is a different thing. And there's a discussion to be had. Doesn't mean that you are an extreme right-winger to talk about the subject. It's something that affects a lot of people, most people in their daily lives, and it needs to be discussed. And in Germany, the AfD is the party that is discussing this, and the opposition to them is absolutely rigid. They have what they call cordon sanitaire, where nobody will work with them and so on, just because they have these views, which, as I say, are just a matter of degree and argument, in my opinion. Anyway, the book covers a lot of material. I haven't talked too much about the trial itself, because there's some twists and turns in it, which I don't want to deprive you of. Book's very interesting, particularly if you're interested in the history since World War II, and the rather feeble efforts by the German government, who to appear to be anti-Nazi by putting restrictions on what they call Nazi speech, and yet at the same time being very, very reluctant to actually prosecute the murderers who actually carried out the Holocaust.